But let's move the conversation on to your recent-ish episode, The Media Are the Terrorists. Could you explain what made you make that and what the Werther effect is and
Mm.
where does it come from?
Okay, yeah, let's start there. The Sorrows of Young Werther was a novel by Goethe, which I have not read. It's on my reading list, but I will confess that I have not read it. But it is apparently about a young man, unrequited love, and he's quite smitten with this woman, but he can never have her. So in the end, he eventually ends up killing himself. And apparently, this became one of the earliest recorded instances of a copycat effect where young men in Europe started killing themselves in the exact same manner, dressed up in the way that Werther was in this novel, etc. So it started to become a known phenomenon to the point where this book was actually banned in various places. So interesting, right? And could you imagine today a novel having that kind of effect on the public? Well, of course not, because unfortunately no one reads. But do you think television? Do you think movies? Do you think those types of things can have that effect? Well, of course, it's a known phenomenon, which is precisely why when media is dealing with subjects like, for example, suicide, you will always see the suicide hotline information and things like that always appended to it because the media, of course, they know that this type of thing really can spur people into action. When you see something fictionalized, even in a fictional environment, you are more likely to go out and do it. Now, this obviously has some incredible resonance with such things as Columbine, which was the advent of the school shooting phenomenon of the past couple of decades, where every time there's a school shooting event and it becomes the 24/7, and look, here's the names and faces of the people suspected of doing this, and wow, aren't they famous now? And again, to what degree are the media culpable for actually propagating and making those events happen, given the fact that they know that there are copycats that happen about that with regards to these types of things. So in that regard, I talked to Lauren Coleman, who wrote a book on this subject that if you're at all interested in, you definitely should read. It's called The Copycat Effect. And he has a blog where he has been keeping track for decades now of these types of copycat phenomenon and how they are propagated through the media. He has many examples in his book. But one that was particularly interesting was I interviewed him around the time of the Aurora, Colorado Batman movie shooting, James Holmes. And I believe we talked a couple of weeks maybe after that shooting, and he had in the immediate wake of that shooting, he had said there is going to be a copycat shooting within a week. Because the way the media is portraying this, I've seen this so many times, there will be a copycat. And lo and behold, there was a man arrested in Maine for planning and thankfully not perpetrating, but planning and getting the stash ready for a copycat shooting at the very theater where Lauren Coleman had actually seen Batman Rising, or whatever it's called, The Dark Knight Rises, a couple of days before that. So that was an interesting part of that, which just goes to show that, again, I think he knows what he's talking about. But the deeper issue here is if the media, again, knows that this is not some new thing that people have never heard about. The copycat effect is a real studied phenomenon that you can read academic treatises about. It is a known quantity. So, but what about those types of portrayals of, well, obviously, suicide and things like that is perhaps the most common way that this is understood. But what about some of the other things? I mean, it brings up the real fundamental point of the war on terror, the war of terror. I call it the war of terror because it is a war that is being directed at the public, the viewing public, generally speaking. And I think, as we were talking about earlier, the greatest power that any tyrant has is the ability to direct the attention of the public. So if you can direct the attention of say the American viewing public to the point where people are way more scared and way more cognizant of Al-Qaeda terror around every corner, and I could die in an Al-Qaeda terror attack, when in reality, they're statistically much more likely to drown in the bathtub, die of a bee sting, a lightning strike, you name it. All of these crazy things that sound insane, but actually, Americans dying of Al-Qaeda terror attacks in America since 9/11. Actually, there's many, 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 many more things that you statistically should be afraid of. Why aren't you? Oh, because every single day you are receiving the indoctrination and the programming. You should be scared of this. You should be scared of this. You should be scared of this. That raises the fundamental question: who are the terrorists? Is it is it even the people who are committing the terror attacks? In a certain sense, all they can do is that particular action, which affects those particular people. The rest is done by the media, which draws attention to those acts. That's why terrorists have always, always relied on the media and always claim responsibility and want to get that attention and want their name and their cause. That's why they do what they do. Terror only works when it is propagated out to the masses, as the media does. So there are some deep questions about what the media is, essentially, in that relationship. Are they terrorists themselves, or at the very least terrorists by proxy?
So with the school shootings or terrorist attacks and big events like that, what do you think the media should be doing instead? Because with something like 9/11, people would say or argue, obviously, you cannot not report on that. It's too big of an event.
Right.
Maybe, I remember when I was younger, I'd say like 14, 15, when the ISIS attacks were going on. Every time there was an attack, even if, they wasn't that affiliated with ISIS, but they had, some stuff at their house, instantly they say it's an ISIS attack, which obviously scares people more. And what I find interesting with football or soccer is when someone invades the pitch, they will not show it because they don't encourage people or make them a celebrity. Which, I mean, it doesn't really prevent it because people still run on for other reasons. But they have the thought, well, let's not show them because let's not make them a celebrity or give them reason to want to go on. But then with an ICE attack, which actually kills people, isn't, just a bit of fun that, they do report it. So I find it interesting.
Well, you raise some good points. Because let's not strawman here. Absolutely, something like a 9/11, of course. I mean, why does news exist? It is for some sort of event like that. How are they not going to talk about that or portray it? But the incredibly important part of this is, how do you contextualize it? How do you follow up on that? What do you do with that? Does that then change your entire conception of the entire world and how everything should be organized? So we have counterexamples that we could pair off against, say, the ISIS attacks and other things that have occurred sporadically here in Europe and elsewhere for the past couple of decades. We could look at the bombings of America that we forgot, as Time magazine called it, which was a string of bombings, terrorist bombings that took place in New York and Chicago and San Francisco and around the United States in the 1970s. There were a number of different perpetrators of these types of attacks: the Symbionese Liberation Army, the New World Liberation Front, and others, literally committing terror attacks and blowing things up, and in some cases killing people. And at this point, who even knows about that history? At that point, it was not full front page news every single day. Oh my God, another bombing, another blast. Where will the next one be? And now how can we reorder the country in order to deal with this terror threat? No, they understood at that time, the more we report on this, the more that we give it attention, the more it will happen, the more effect it will have. So at that time, they weren't reporting on it. So what changed in the post 9/11 era? Obviously, we don't want another 9/11. But does that mean that then we report on literally every single possible terror threat that could possibly happen anywhere for any reason, and things that, even if it's at 99 times out of 100, at least in the United States, it was an FBI informant, it was someone that the FBI was working with, the FBI entrapped them, et cetera, et cetera. It's always something along those lines. But anyway, reporting on every plot and then moving on to the next one before we have time to even parse what that last one was about, and continually keeping people in fear. There are ways to report that presumably would not terrorize or give rise to copycatting. But I think demonstrably what we've seen over the past couple of decades of the war of terror, or the past few years of the scamdemic, I think that is not the way you would report if you were not trying to encourage the hysteria.
do you not say, they play devil's advocate, would you not say the reason they report on every terrorist attack from every angle and COVID is because fear sells? No one really goes on to check the news to hear
Mm.
good news. It's like COVID every day, checking every day, constant story of, well, what are the numbers today? You know, just because they're scared themselves, so they want that dose. Is it not just these companies? And there was even the video of Project Veritas, I think, with a CNN writer who basically said, you know, blood leads or something like that, fear sells. So he said that the network head said for the COVID death counters to basically stay on it because it was giving them more ratings as people were
Yeah,
checking in to see
yeah.
it. So
If
it,
it bleeds, it leads. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And I think that is how people have traditionally, most cynically, in within the mainstream narrative. I think that's the way people have approached this. Well, yeah, they're just trying to. I mean, obviously, it sells newspapers, it gets eyeballs, something like that. But I would say it's demonstrably different, especially in the internet era, because I think the in a sense the commodification of our attention, the attention economy that has arisen in the past couple of decades, is a race to the bottom, with regards to who can be the most sensational, who can get the most grabby headline. And it really does not matter at all to these, certainly to these companies, whether you click out of what is this, and then you're angered by, oh, this is nothing, this is stupid. A click is a click, and they win either way. So there is that element to it. But again, I think it's too coordinated in terms of this particular issue becoming the only thing we can talk about during this time, this era. I think that speaks to far too much coordination for it to simply be a cynical media tycoon who decides, oh, I think we're gonna try to hype things up and sell it. Again, this did happen way back in the early days of newspapers, the yellow peril and the yellow journalism of Hearst and his rivals in New York, trying to compete for people's attention. So it's not a uniquely modern phenomenon, certainly. But again, I would say that certainly the war of terror reporting is different than that. Yes, it is to some extent bleeds, it leads, but there was a lot of not bleeding as well. That was still every single day there would be a reason for Al Qaeda or the latest potential for some unnamed threat that we can't tell you about. The color code changed. Oh my God, that seems to me to be a different phenomenon than the prurient sort of reporting of, oh, look at these dead people or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the war on terror is definitely different. There's clearly obviously an agenda to drum up war, to make the terrorist as scary as possible, to be able to go to the wars in Afghanistan or Iraq and then, you know, continue on basically to today. So yeah, that was definitely a different era of, there was an agenda, we need to keep them scared. We can't let them forget about 9/11 and just put it into perspective of, you know, that's probably not going to happen again for a long time, because they needed the support. If